Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War. I feel like I said back weird again. Back. I don't fucking know. This is the Great War, week 85, equilibrium of carnage at Verdun. And Portugal joins the war. Spoilers? Come on. Not like Portugal joining the war really changes much, though. Let's be real here. Before we dive in, though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay. We haven't had any updates on the Russian front in a hot minute. So I wonder what this is gonna mainly be about. I'm guessing it's gonna feel mainly about maybe the Russian movements at around Erzurum and Verdun, and then obviously Portugal. I doubt much else will be covered. Maybe some of the Italian front.
What was the big news this week? The big news this week was simple. 100 years ago this week, Portugal joined the war.
Woo! More dead bodies.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the charge of the Dorset Yeomanry broke the Senussi defenses on the Libyan front. In the west, more and more men were pouring into Verdun as the bloody fighting finished its second week. The Russians were still advancing in Anatolia. The Austrians had taken the Albanian capital, and Germany declared that every ship of any kind that belonged to an enemy and had a gun would be sunk without warning. Here's what followed. As you may have guessed, more death and destruction at Verdun followed. On March 6th, in a snowstorm, the Germans launched an attack on the Mortagne on the left bank of the Meuse, and the preliminary artillery barrage to kick off the attack was as intense as the one on February 21st that began the entire Battle of Verdun. But on the French side, General de Bazeilles now had 4 divisions in line on
Motherfucker lived to be 96 years old? God damn.
the left bank and a 5th in reserve. It was the most coherent defense system yet seen at Verdun, but still, the initial German attacks made some depressingly easy successes. One of the French divisions, the 67th, had no real experience of being shelled. Telephone lines were all cut within half an hour and their morale just plummeted. And then the German infantry attacked. The 77th Brigade crossed the Meuse at Brabant, and General von Zweil had even brought up an armored train whose guns would support his infantry. The French spotted this, though, and concentrated fire forced it to retire. But the damage had been done. The Germans were now established on the left bank, behind the French first line. Another blow for the French was this. French gunners from the Bois Barreau had rained enormous shell fire on the advancing Germans. But in the swampy ground, many of the fuses failed to catch and explode. Soon, General Riemann's 22nd Reserve Division raced up the left bank to join von Zweil's men and hit the French with a pincer movement at Regneville. Regneville fell, as did Forges, and the Germans moved into the Bois de Corbeau, the only woods near the Mortagne. By the end of the second day, more than 3,000 men of the demoralized French 67th Division had surrendered to the Germans, and de Bazeilles issued orders that the commander at Forges would be court-martialed and that artillery and machine guns would be turned on any units that retreated further. He could well see what the German intentions were. Mortagne was to be captured from the northeast via the Bois de Corbeau, which the Germans had entirely taken by the afternoon of the 7th. The French must retake the Bois, no matter the cost, and at dawn on the 8th came the attack. The French counterattack was led by Lieutenant Colonel Macker, brandishing a cane and smoking a cigar at the head of his troops. At a steady walking pace, his regiment crossed the 400 meters to the Bois, and as German machine guns tore holes in the formation, the French closed ranks. At 100 meters, they fixed bayonets and charged. The Germans were totally stunned by this and fell back, and by 7:20, nearly the whole Bois de Corbeau was again in French hands. Things weren't going so well for the Germans in the frontal attack on Mortagne either. French artillery had anticipated an attack there for days, and the wall of gunfire they laid down was impossible for the Germans to overcome. General Philippe Pétain's defense used the flat trajectory 75mm guns, which were not much use against trenches, to fire on no man's land whenever the Germans advanced. They were of great use there. The Germans were now struggling with the challenges of moving their big guns across the blasted landscape in winter weather. And the French artillery, by this time, was an equal and opposite force. And as for the hero Macker, the guy with the cane and the cigar, on the 10th, his men had pushed another German force out of another wood near the Bois de Corbeau. But when Macker went to congratulate a battalion commander, both men were shot dead by a German machine gun.
No longer a mad lad, he's dead lad.
At just that moment, the Germans counterattacked, and with the death of their leader, the French troops lost heart. The Germans retook Bois de Corbeau, but fortunately for the French, the German losses were now so high they could advance no further. That story is World War I in a nutshell. It wasn't just the Germans who could advance no further. Let's turn our attention to the Middle East, where the British relief forces were again trying to break the siege at Kut and rescue Charles Townshend's trapped British and Indian forces. By March 7th, the relief force was so near Kut they could see its minarets, and by the 8th, the 91st day of the siege, General Sir Fenton Aylmer's forces had...
Sir Fenton Aylmer. God, he looks like a snob. That is a very punchable face right there. Look at that shit. And look at that 5 head. Like, god damn. That might be a 6 head. Holy shit. My guy. Like, I mean, I know I'm losing it too, but like, I feel like at this point, you just gotta go bald.
Had reached the second Ottoman line at Es-Sin, just 13 kilometers from Kut. After an all-night march, the British forces advanced in 3 columns against the Dujayla redoubt and bombarded the Ottomans with heavy artillery. But the British could not break them, and all day long the attacks kept up, and all day long the story was the same. The fortifications were too strong, the defenders too numerous, and by the end of the day, the lack of water, which the British had to bring all the way from their main camp, made continuing attacks impossible. And even though they could see the flashes of their besieged comrades firing into the rear of the Ottoman lines from Kut, they returned to their main camp 35 kilometers away downriver after suffering 3,500 casualties. General Aylmer would lose his command because of his failure to break the siege. But he had attacked even with terrible odds, partly because he was ordered to, but partly because the spring floods were coming. Aylmer would be replaced by Lieutenant General Sir George Gorringe. Oddly enough, inside Kut, Townshend had realized that he had a lot more food than he had first thought. And his men also realized they could eat their horses, though many Indian troops refused to for religious reasons. Still, by March, and by the newest failure of relief, and really more and more as the month rolled on, there was a serious decline in morale. Up to this time, men were moderately cheerful and in fair spirits. One saw, however, how deeply they were disappointed each time the relief failed. From this time onwards, there was a rapid lowering of stamina, vitality, physical condition, and health. Men at fatigues, such as trench digging, after 10 minutes work had to rest a while and go at it again. Men on sentry would drop down. There were instances of Indians returning from trench duty in the evening, seemingly with nothing the matter, who laid down and were found dead in the morning. Death due to starvation asthenia. Men in such a low state of vitality can stand little in the shape of illness. An attack of diarrhea often ended fatally. All recuperative power had gone. But if Kut was looking good for the Ottomans, elsewhere in Ottoman territory, things were not going quite so well. On the 4th, the Russians landed at Atine, east of Trabzon. On the 7th, they captured Rize, and at the end of the week, drove the Turks beyond the river Kalapodamos. The Russians were even advancing in Persia this week, capturing Kola and occupying Senna. But the big news story was diplomatic. On March 9th, 1916, the German Empire declared war on Portugal. You could have seen some of this coming. Last week, Portugal seized 38 German and Austro-Hungarian ships in Portuguese ports at British request. Portugal had been neutral, but Britain was Portugal's main trading partner, and Germany had just loosened restraints on who their U-boats would target, and this jeopardized Portuguese trade, so it all fell together. And here are a couple of notes to round out the week. On March 8th came an announcement from Tokyo. 3 warships captured by the Japanese from Russia in their last war were purchased back by the Tsar. In Africa, Lieutenant General Jan Smuts advances on Kilimanjaro, and by virtue of his feats at Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal was promoted to general in the Ottoman army, given the title Pasha, and sent to the Caucasus front at the age of just 35.
Woo, another Pasha.
And that was the week. Heavy action at Verdun. The British failing again on the Tigris, and the Russians advancing in Anatolia and Persia.
Now we have, what, 4 pashas? Or did one of them die? I thought one of them died or was disgraced. Is it back down to 3? I don't remember.
Oh, and Portugal joined the war. There had actually been skirmishes between German and Portuguese colonial troops in Africa in 1914. But war was never declared back then. But it is now, and within days, Portugal and Austria-Hungary would also declare war on each other. So Portugal now begins organizing men who will be sent to the nearby Western Front, where thousands of them will die. That's not a spoiler. That's just stating the obvious, because week after week after week, for over 200 weeks, thousands of men will die. That's modern war. If you'd like to find out more about this...
And now is the equilibrium of carnage at Verdun. Portugal joins the war. The Great War, week 85. So what I'm getting the vibe for here for 1916 is that this is going to be an entertaining year at the very least in these week-by-week episodes. These week-by-week episodes are going to be more filled with stuff that's more interesting to watch than, say, what was going on in 1915, where it seemed to be just a bunch of, like, staring at each other and then the occasional battle. Now it's seeming like there's a battle happening truly all the fucking time. So there feels to be more being talked about now than there were in 1915. 1915 definitely felt like a lull in this war. 1917 may also end up being like 1915. We'll see though. We got a while. We got still several months to get through. I think this is in March, beginning of March. Got like 9 more months to go of 1916 before we hit 1917. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.